Hello and welcome to this video on the problems, dangers, and to a degree the history of monocultures. Monocultures are situations where you plant a single crop continuously without interspersing another species. This is an approach that we use seasonally in industrial agriculture, but with the power of hindsight we know to change the crop each season. This means you might sow wheat one season, rye the next, and then peas after that, and then bring in cattle to finish up. These concepts were not as clearly established in Ireland from 1845 to 1852. The lack of knowledge about monocultures and microbiology led to the Great Famine. This is colloquially known as the Irish potato famine. Before we explain the problems, some context is needed. Shortly before the 16th century turned, Spanish sailors returned from South America with both corn and potatoes. It took centuries for it to be grown as a food, but by 1800 was considered a staple foodstuff. The dependency on potato was stimulated by large-scale food shortages arising from revolutionary wars in Europe. The success of potatoes led to emperors, kings, and other nobility encouraging potatoes to be grown. Frederick the Great of Prussia even issued an order to grow potatoes. When this failed, he even more cunningly convinced his peasants the potato was a state secret, and that then encouraged the peasantry to grow and eat their own or steal his. All this effort set up large sections of society that only grew potatoes and consumed potatoes. There were fields upon fields with nothing but potato. This was sown each season and consumed, not just in Prussia, but notably Ireland. Irish farmers would plant their fields with potatoes. This was encouraged by British rule, who found the starving population uncontrollable. A population that was very Catholic and thus did not use contraceptives. This created a population that would balloon, then have no food, and stagnate, or worse yet die, all the time their health worsening. Potatoes became a major crop by the late 1600s. By the 1700s it was a staple, a crop which could be harvested all year and provided constant sustenance. This also meant that all fields of potatoes had them continuously replanted. No crop was ever used. This created conditions for predators or, more importantly, pathogens to enter into the soil if it had a suitable target. In this case, potato pathogens in the form of blight. Blight became established in the soil, and it did not matter how the soil was treated at this time. Every potato plant that was put in there would produce almost nothing or nothing at all. The primary infestation is called Phytothoria infestans, and it's found in water mold, or specifically it's a form of water mold. This is notable given the state of the soil in winter in Ireland tends to be quite wet. This encourages the development of mold. The mold then entered both the potato tuber and the plant as a whole. This caused damage and was known as early blight. Early blight is caused by a microorganism called Alternaria solani. There's also a second kind of blight called late blight, and this is the one that seemed to have hit Ireland in this time frame. The fungi can affect not just potatoes though. In fact, it can affect many members of the Solanaceae family. Anywhere where there is moist, cool environments, it can create spores. These can live in water and then infect any plant which is exposed to them. Spore production is generally going to occur at temperatures below 15 degrees Celsius. Now that we know something about not only what led to the blight, but what blight is, we should look at where it came from. Evidence indicates that it originates in Mexico, but the Irish infection begins somewhere around 1844, with newspapers reporting a disease in America over the previous years which had affected their crop yield. It appears that at least theoretically, ships bringing potatoes from Baltimore, Philadelphia, or New York could have brought potatoes that had these diseases, and that led to Ireland becoming infected. The fungus itself is also interesting. Phytophthora infestans has a variety of phases to its growth. These make it able to both survive for extended periods in soil, but also take advantage of the ability to be transported in a new host and to take advantage of the host in its initial stages of growth. By going through these different phases at different times, it can more advantageously manipulate both itself and the environment. Phytophthora has spores which have flagellae. In fact, they're biflagellated, meaning they have two tails. This allows them to move, but they also have a chemotactic sense. This means they can get into water, on films, and even within the organism itself, and move to both areas where there are fewer of them, thereby increasing the spread of the infection, and also move towards targets that it can take advantage of. It also has oospores, which are viable for many years, and these can remain in the soil. This means over periods where the weather is not inclined to support the development of the fungus, it can sit there waiting. It's one reason why this particular famine went for 7 years. It's incredibly hard to get on top of. The obvious signs of infection by Phytophthora are that the potato stems and leaves develop a white appearance. As for the tubers, the white mycelium of the infection shows up on the surface of the potato itself. In order to have such a massive outbreak, Phytophthora can go through its entire life cycle of going from spore through to reproductive adult plant releasing spores in about 5 days. It starts on the leaves and spreads throughout the entire plant in that time frame. In other cases, if it's raining, water can wash spores into the soil and they'll begin infecting the tubers as they're developing. This will then move its way up the plant. Those same spores can move a long distance if there is enough wind. This means that if you don't get on top of blight very quickly and very early, the infection has moved well beyond the area you think it has because of the time frame for reproduction and the fact that wind can carry it a long way along with water. This is further complicated by the fact that even tubers that appear to be healthy without any kind of sign of infection can develop rot later on. The upside to controlling this is that Phytophthora does not survive very well when it does not have a host. It can't really go through the necessary reproduction, both sexual and asexual. It can only survive for a brief period in the wild without something to act as a host. Further, when it gets to extremely cold weather or extremely warm weather, the fungi does not survive very well either. This further inhibits its growth. The catch to that statement is that if the fungi has infected a tuber, the fungi can continue growing there for an extended period, where it is protected from both the warmth and the cold. This is thought to be one of the major ways that the mycelium or inoculum can continue spreading, especially with a new growing season. One single potato that has been infected by it can lead to an entire crop being ruined by spreading that disease very quickly. This is one of the major reasons why in the current world we use certified seed potatoes. These are known to be low levels that could be possibly related to infecting it. There are a variety of strains that are known to be there, but not be a big problem, like this potato blight was. Infection by viruses and other pathogens is not limited to just potatoes. Tobacco mosaic virus exists. The original banana was subject to a fungus that affects it in a similar vein to potatoes and led to an entire new particular variety of banana being grown because it could resist the virus, and even now that's being undermined. Cotton, eggplant, the list goes on species that can be affected by particular pathogens due to intensive cultivation in one area as a monoculture. While crop rotation was not a novel concept during the Irish famine, it was also not viable on a large scale, as what potatoes and grains were grown. There was no way for them to be able to rotate fields to have the necessary movement of animals, different species, and a staple crop. There simply wasn't enough viable ground. This meant that the only way was to completely overhaul and stop using potatoes for an extended period and allow the virus to die out. This meant that they could remove the virus from that area, and so long as they followed appropriate steps to minimize the ability for it to resurface, they could stop it from continuing to come back. But efforts were at times unsuccessful, and as mentioned, it spreads quickly and easily by both air and water. This is why the Irish famine went for 7 years. Many famines that were associated with something like this would go for a year or 2, maybe 3, until solutions were found, but that wasn't possible with this, since potatoes were such an important and staple crop to the Irish, and in fact right across Europe. The Irish famine just happens to be one of the best known examples. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.